Welcome, everyone, to this special AJC American Jewish Committee Westchester Fairfield series of Meet the Candidates for Westchester, given the New York redistricting. Today, we have the opportunity to meet with William Faulkner, Republican candidate running for New York's 17th Congressional District, with primaries taking place on August 23rd. AJC American Jewish Committee is a nonpartisan organization, and we do not rate or endorse candidates. The issues we work on are too important to ascribe to any political party or candidate. The questionnaire and meetings we are holding with candidates on both sides of the political aisle are designed to share information directly from the candidates themselves with you, the voters, in accordance with IRS regulations. We sent a candidate questionnaire to all candidates for this congressional district, which includes some of the questions and topics which we'll discuss today. And we have also reached out to all candidates running for Congress in this district for a meeting like the one we are holding today. We are recording these meetings and will circulate the questionnaire responses and recordings of these meetings widely so that constituents can hear directly from the candidates and make their own personal informed decisions prior to the August 23rd primaries. Naomi, Marrow, thank you for hosting our conversation today. The floor is yours for this important conversation.
Thank you, Myra. We at AJC endeavor to find common ground across the political spectrum to combat anti-Semitism in all its forms, promote Israel's security and full integration in the community of nations, and counter hate, extremism, and threats to democracy at home and abroad. The topics we'll discuss today cover a wide range of issues, including what candidates do to foster bipartisanship. We'll begin with a 3-minute open-ended opportunity for William to share his priorities if elected to Congress. And then during the moderated conversation, the Q&A, among other issues, we'll discuss topics of importance generally to the electorate and some of specific importance to the community. We hope this information will be beneficial. And now let's begin. And again, welcome to William Faulkner, who is a member of the Somers Town Council and very active in a range of community activities in Somers. William, take 3 minutes to tell us a little about your background and your priorities.
Certainly. Thank you, Naomi, and thank you, the American Jewish Committee of Fairfield and Westchester County. I'm delighted to be with you today. By way of background, I'm 55 years old. I was born in the Bronx, which is one county away, of course. Grew up in the New York area solely. Went to college out in Indiana to Purdue. Furthered my education back here at Fordham University, where I got my MBA. And did some executive training up at Harvard University up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. From a professional perspective, I've always been a Fortune 100 corporate finance person. I worked for the bulk of my career, most of my years at General Electric, but I've also worked at IBM and PepsiCo and Bloomberg. And along the way, it was all in one type of finance role or another. So I'm clearly a numbers person. During that time, did the life cycle, got married, had a child, did a lot of community service. You name it, if it was in my town, I was involved in it. I've coached the kids for soccer for 29 consecutive seasons. Was very proud to see many of the girls I coached graduate onward and become state champions in 2014 in the state of New York. Worked with the Somers Education Foundation, was president of that fine organization, where we raise money and distribute it out to students for academic pursuits that they may not have the funding for in general. During my time there, I presided over the $1 millionth being earned and distributed. So it's a win-win situation. All the funds are privately raised and it keeps taxes just a little bit lower. I'm also involved in the Lions Club. I'm the vice president of the local Lions Club. And as of July 2nd of this year, married the love of my life, Meredith Black. And so I'm still 6 weeks into my new marriage with a very lovely, and as they say, I met a nice Jewish girl.
Okay, your priorities now, if elected to Congress.
Yeah, my everything I do and everything I have done in my political life for 9 years, on the town council, made sure that taxes remain low. We are the lowest tax town in all of Westchester County, which is a dubious honor because Westchester County is the highest tax county in America. So keeping taxes low is a huge priority, but everything I do starts from my principles. And my principles are very simply, my values are very simply truth, justice, and liberty. So everything I do from a governing perspective, from a personal perspective, from a business perspective, boils down into one or more of those three things. In terms of specifically my priorities, definitely one would be security, both border security and security in our streets. And we know why. We know the statistics. Crime is out of control. No cash bail isn't working. Defund the police was an idea that I think has completely backfired and caused much more harm than good. So security in general is one of my top priorities. The economy as well. The economy is suffering. 2 weeks ago, we officially entered into a recession. A recession, of course, being defined as 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product growth, which we have had. Add to that, inflation as of June was 8.9% or more. And when you combine inflation with recession, you have stagflation. It's the worst economic state that a country can be in. And lo and behold, here we are. So I think the way out of that, and most economists will agree that the way out of that is to start being more fiscally responsible, like I've done at the local level, making sure that we don't increase taxes beyond the 2% tax rate, making sure that we do balance the budget, and make sure that we bring down this $30 trillion national debt. And that is an incredible number. Just to put our heads around that, if we were going to count from 1 to 30 trillion starting right now, and it took 1 second per number, that would take almost 1 million years for us to count to that number. It's that astronomical. So I think cost cutting.
I can tell you are very passionate about these extremely important issues. We have a lot of questions to get to, and I want to make sure you don't run out of time.
Got it.
Launching into them, and you
Please
will
do.
have an opportunity for closing remarks and can come back and tell us more about why stagflation is such a disaster.
Certainly.
For our audience, we want to make sure that you know that we know there is no single issue or set of issues that define the American Jewish voter, and there is no issue that is a litmus test for Jewish voters about whom they should elect. So voters want to hear from you about the number of questions and others that we'll be talking about today. Ready to jump in?
I am.
Okay. The political divide in this country is of great concern to many. What actions have you taken or would you take to foster bipartisanship with colleagues across the aisle?
Yeah, important topic. I will start out by saying I do have a fair amount of experience in this. My hallmark crowning achievement during my corporate life was to establish an international standard between banks and corporates. And that required quite a bit of diplomatic leadership skills. That required quite a number of meetings and open, candid discussions. But with that in mind, with the goal and objective of each meeting to be for me to find some common ground, for me to find, as I like to say, the win-win, with that objective uninterrupted, I was able to find those things. I was able to find those common grounds and figure out why it would be cost effective in terms of both worth their time and their investment in dollars and their investment of resources and human capital to achieve this together. On a national political basis, to your point, the spectrum is absolutely enormous. And I'm running a common sense campaign. I'm not an extreme rightist or an extreme leftist. And I think that common sense, that middle ground, is what people, especially now in this country, are clamoring for. There are extremists on both sides, which dilute and distract the real arguments. We know who they are. We don't need to mention them. But I would find common ground, and I would use my skills to get a win-win, regardless of what the issue is. Open dialogue, candor would be the methods that I would use and the tools that I would leverage to get there.
And moving on, let's talk about hate, extremism, and threats to democracy at home, abroad. The FBI's latest hate crime statistics report, released in exactly a year ago, shows hate crimes at their highest level in 12 years. Jews were the target of 55% of all religiously motivated hate crimes in 2020, in spite of the fact that we account for only 2% of the population. Because federal reporting of hate crimes is voluntary, fewer than 15% of the nation's law enforcement agencies submit any hate crimes data to the FBI as of 2020. So, how should law enforcement and elected officials work together to address hate crimes, and what steps do you think should be taken to protect and support vulnerable communities?
Great question. First and foremost, I would say let's start enforcing the laws that we have. It's very common for people to say, okay, well, we need a new law to do this, we need a new law to do that. And those can be very good ideas, but it's really hard to implement those when you're not enforcing the laws that are currently on the books. Hate crimes, theft, personal assault, especially in New York City, we've seen all of those things grow up. I haven't forgotten about that synagogue out in Pittsburgh not too long ago. So just when sometimes you think things are getting better, sometimes you think humanity is prevailing, something like that regrettably happens. So I would be fully in favor of enforcing the law to its fullest and charging criminals who perpetrate those crimes, whether they be hate crimes or not, to the fullest extent of the law. I think another help in that regard would be the suspension and the ending of this policy of no cash bail. I understand the reasons that it was done. I disagree that the issue was warranting such an extreme action, but I would like to see people who participate in these types of activities, illegal activities, and bad for the soul activities prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and up to and including incarceration and getting them off the streets. If they're in jail, they can't commit any more hate crimes.
An allied discussion combating anti-Semitism, a crucial first step is to define it. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, also known as IHRA or IHRA, working definition of anti-Semitism is a clear and concise description of what it is in its various forms. The definition gives governments, law enforcement, civil society organizations increased capacity to identify, prosecute, and deter anti-Semitic incidents. The working definition is now used by the U.S. government, including the State Department and Department of Education, and has been adopted by dozens of municipalities and across this country and nations around the world, including in this county, in Westchester, several. Do you support wider acceptance and usage of this working definition, and in what ways?
Well, I certainly do. And going back to my principles, truth, justice, and liberty, because it would be just. And I looked up further the definition from IHRA, and it states, as you probably know, anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish communities, institutions, and religious facilities. We do have this thing, thank God, in our country called freedom of religion, which provides additional protection. And I would just say, based on that definition, which is a fine one, anything that is motivated by hate is a bad idea, and it's a bad idea across the board. I don't know if that needs any additional explanation. But yes, I would support those laws. I would entertain, I don't know of any laws that are pending, any more laws that would be more harsh, but I certainly would consider them. And it's something that has no place in decent society, has no place in America today. We were founded on religious freedom. Diversity is one of our strengths. And for those individuals who want to take us backwards, not forwards, I don't have any use for them.
Ukraine. The conflict there has reawakened fears of authoritarianism, cross-border aggression, and threats to the international order. What should the U.S. do to bolster defenses against threats to global peace and promote and protect human rights and democratic values?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing because this is not at all the first time that such aggression has been perpetrated by Mr. Putin. He did this in Georgia several years ago. He did this in Crimea several years ago, and now he's doing it to the larger nation of Ukraine in general. My in-laws happen to share some lineage and heritage over to Odessa, so I have some personal connection to the nation. And I think some of the things that can be done short term is the expansion of NATO. I know Sweden and Finland are actively petitioning to join NATO. I think in due course, the sooner the better. Ukraine, I would also work with them very hard to get them to join NATO. And it's for good reason. It's effective. It's effective. No NATO nation has ever been attacked. No, Article 5 has never had to be employed, with the exception of 9/11, when our NATO allies came to our defense in Afghanistan. So in order to preserve the peace and promote the peace in Europe and throughout the world, I think expanding NATO would be a very good first step.
Now to the U.S. and Israel. Together, we enjoy an unparalleled special relationship based on shared dedication to democratic principles, rule of law, religious freedom, individual liberty, and common strategic objectives. The U.S. and Israel also share a commitment to achieving an enduring regional peace that assures the security of the Jewish people in their historic homeland and self-determination and expanded opportunity for the Palestinians. How would you describe the U.S.-Israel relationship, and how should the U.S. continue to support Israel? What should our role be in facilitating negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians?
Yeah, it's no secret, and it's widely accepted that Israel is our strongest ally in the Middle East. I think everybody knows that and accepts that. But there's very good reason for that. We're both democracies. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. They are surrounded by differing theologies as well as different political ideals. So that makes them very vulnerable. So again, back to the issue of fairness and what is just, I think America has a big responsibility to promote democracy throughout the world. and defend our allies throughout the world. And it's a win-win situation. It's not at all one-sided. You know, in terms of what would I do to support them? Continue to support them economically, continue to advance the Abraham Accords, and continue to support them militarily. I'm not that young, and I do remember back in 1981 when Saddam Hussein was trying to build a nuclear reactor for energy purposes. And Israel got together and said, this is a ridiculous threat to our own security and safety, so we're going to have to do something about that, and did. And I was only 14, but I remember cheering about that. And again, that was a great example of how the military support that we provide to Israel was a win-win. It was some new technology. I happen to be a licensed pilot. I like airplanes, and the F-16 was put to great use at that in that particular combat. And I think it was a win-win. It was a win-win for Israel and its security. It was a win-win for the region, so that Saddam Hussein did not develop nuclear weapons. And I think in retrospect and hindsight and any purview you want to look at that incident, it was the right thing to do. So continued support for the state of Israel, of course, for political reasons, because it's the right thing to do, and for some personal reasons now as well.
And now a softball question. Iran.
Well, doesn't history repeat itself, Naomi? Yeah, fascinating. The same zero tolerance would be my policy in that Iran cannot become a nuclearized nation. They claim again, just like Saddam Hussein did in 1981, they need a nuclear reactor. They want to do it for peaceful energy purposes. Iran floats on a sea of oil. They do not have to look very hard to find a solution to any energy woes that they think they might have. So I think there are some administrations who have tried to placate Iran. I'm remembering President Obama trying to, we know the stories, trying to pay off the Iranians billions and billions of US dollars in cash being unloaded into Iran, to try and get them to see it one way or another. And it didn't work. They persist. And I think what does work better is Ronald Reagan's doctrine, which is peace through strength. No means no, and Iran cannot be allowed to be a nuclear power.
Gerrymandering. I mean, you're dealing with it right now. Should Congress be responsible for it, or, as many have said, state legislatures? And what's the issue if Congress is one party effectively controlling both houses, or state legislators are one party strong? What do you think? How do we resolve
Yeah, I think here in New York, we definitely have had our fill of experience with gerrymandering the congressional districts. In fact, I was bounced around 3 times in the last year. So I started in the we started in the 18th district, where our incumbent was Congressman Maloney. It was redistricted earlier in the year of 2022, and I became in the 16th district with the incumbent being Congressman Jamal Bowman, and then it was redistricted further when that was overturned. And now I'm back in the 17th district, where after the election of Sean Patrick Maloney to move from the 18th to the 17th, he is my incumbent congressman once again. So there's a lot of craziness, and let's be honest, everybody does it. That doesn't make it right. Depending on which party is in power and which state on a census year, which lasts 2020, they are entitled and obligated by the U.S. Constitution to divvy up their congressional districts. Now, how they do it, the states are given a tremendous amount of latitude. And again, how partisan do they want to be? New York tried to be as partisan as they wanted to be, and the party in power was slapped down by the judiciary branch and said this is an egregious attempt at gerrymandering. Again, I'm a math guy, I'm a numbers guy. I would like to see some sort of unbiased calculation as to how congressional districts are divvied up. Something like pick a point, either the state capital or the geographic center of the state, go clockwise or counterclockwise until you fill up enough of 770,000 citizens that fill up a congressional district, and do that regardless of political affiliation of the residents in that would-be district. You could also start in the Northwest and just kind of keep going southeast until you come up with, your 770 people. But if it should be completely arbitrary to political registration, but it's not. And it could be simply tied to geographic proximity and affinity. And that would take the politics out of it. That would take the politics out of it on a nationwide basis. And I would favor that as opposed to a handful of people trying to stack the deck in their own favor.
What about immigration?
Mm-hmm. I am the grandson of immigrants, two of them from Europe, and they came over legally. And I do support legal immigration. And I support it because I think it's fair. I think the rest of America does have a right to determine who does and doesn't come into the country. And I believe with that sort of order, what we can do is change it as needed, but change it on a majority rule basis, not on an executive order type of basis. And by that, I mean, let's take, for example, Ukraine. We spoke about that earlier. Those folks are clearly refugees and should be quickly given refugee status and be welcome into our country above and beyond whatever quota we have for the nation of Ukraine going into the year 2022. That seems prudent, that seems logical, and that seems justifiable in my mind. What I don't think I like is a porous border where the United States is allowing anybody and everybody to come in without proper documentation, without any vetting. And I know there's an attempt to do so, but it's not sufficient. We've seen the reports. We know that known terrorists are sneaking into the country through the southern border. Why? Because it's easy. And I would be in favor of securing our southern border for that reason, and because, going back to truth, justice, and liberty, someone's going to have to explain to me why it's just that these folks coming in illegally through the southern border have a right to steal the place in line for all of the people who have come over here legally, like my grandparents.
Thank you for your very robust and thoughtful answers. Greatly appreciated. I want to give you 3 more minutes to wrap up, add anything you felt you wanted to say more about.
Thank you. Thank you again. And thank you again, American Jewish Committee of Westchester and Fairfield, for inviting me. I've enjoyed the time. And I think we covered on many of the big issues. Border security, yes. Crime definitely needs to be relooked at. I think that we need to be reinvesting, not de-investing in the police. I am by no means in favor of the district attorney in New York City, Alvin Bragg, continuing to be employed as a district attorney to his own fault. He has plainly and loudly stated that he does not want to do his job, which is prosecuting criminals. I have 2 very senior friends in NYPD, and they will tell you the horror stories and the heartbreaking stories of how the police want to do their job. They're obviously and understandably discouraged. And who's being hurt most of all in this policy are our friends in the minority communities. Those are the people who are most susceptible. Those are the people who are having the recidivist criminals coming out time and time again and havoc on those neighborhoods. And those are the people who are most vulnerable. talked earlier how Israel is one of the most vulnerable nations because it's surrounded. Well, these enclaves and these neighborhoods are the most vulnerable because they're the most poor. Now, why are we abandoning the law-abiding citizen in the most poorest communities in favor of the criminal? I have no idea. Another passion of mine is education. My grandmother was born in 1915. By the time 1924 rolled around, it was decided that she's just a girl. She's 9 years old. She doesn't need an education. So she went to work in the sweatshops and she would sew for 10, 12 hours a day. A day it's just as hot and humid as this, only every day. We spoke earlier about my passion for education and what I've done on a charitable basis. But that's something that's very important to me as well. School choice, I think, would be a step in the right direction. And I think schools should be defined and charged with teaching the students facts. And I think the role of teaching the students morals should rely and remain with the parents. I think that's been taken away from the parents. I don't like it. Return.
Thank you. This has
Thank you.
been a pleasure.
Thank you, Naomi.
Appreciate your putting the effort into completing the questionnaire and participating today.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you again for this important, thoughtful conversation. I want to remind our audience that AJC is a 501c3 nonpartisan organization that does not rate or endorse candidates. We've reached out to all the congressional candidates in District 16 and 17, and will widely share the questionnaires they've completed and the meeting recordings. Our questionnaire and candidate meetings serve to provide information to constituents in the candidates' own words on a number of issues that are important to the electorate generally and to our community in particular, so you all can make your own informed choice in the ballot when you vote. Doing so is I'm required to say this, doing so is in accordance with IRS guidelines and is done by many nonprofit organizations, and that's all true. So if you have further questions about the primaries, they are taking place on August 23rd, and for more information, email us at westchester@ajc.org. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
And to you.